Welcome to Nikki's Nightmares, where chilling tales come to life. In today's terrifying story, we dive into a horrifying doll encounter, a nightmarish tale about a possessed doll that brings fear and chaos into a family's home. Haunted whispers, unexplained shadows, and the sinister stare of this cursed doll will leave you questioning what's real and what lurks in the dark. If you love scary stories, paranormal encounters, and true horror experiences, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join me as we delve into the deep, dark, and the mysterious. They called her Miriam. I remember the box, the way my aunt had wrapped the cardboard in newspaper and tied it with twine that smelled faintly of attic dust. It was Maggie's 6th birthday, and the apartment buzzed with excitement, the clang of pans, the radio blaring a tiny children's song, our small living room full of cousins and cake. Aunt Nora set the doll down in front of Maggie with that half-smile people make when they're proud of something they've made by hand. This is Miriam. And Maggie touched her hair like she could never get enough of it. Miriam had my sister's brown pigtails, ribboned bows, painted rosy cheeks, and eyes that seemed to stare just a little too long. She was almost the same size as Maggie. You could mistake one for the other in a dim room. Maggie was happy. What kid wouldn't be? But beneath her small, happy head, a soft thread of something else unspooled. I couldn't name it then. I can now. The first things were small. At 2 a.m, I woke because a sound hung over the street like an animal's throat being torn out. Tom, my father, peered out the window and swore he saw a shadow moving down the road, the streetlights eating the light one by one. I remember how I told myself I must have moved her, the way my logic will fold any impossible thing into what you'd like to believe. My stomach had another story. Maggie never went anywhere without Miriam after that. If she had a best friend, Miriam was it. She whispered to her like best friends whisper secrets. "We're sisters," she'd say, or she'd wriggle the doll's painted hand so gently around her own little fingers. But sometimes Maggie would stare at the television until the screen turned nothing but static and the room filled with that high electric hiss. She'd sit and not blink. Once I walked in and found Miriam on the toilet, little legs dangling, like she'd been to the bathroom and hadn't managed to pull her pants back up. We laughed then, an off note, but that laughed out of reason feeling never left me. It escalated in ways that made the word joke fall apart. There were marbles in the hallway that rolled from nowhere, cabinets opened and lay empty. Furniture lifted like someone had ghosted their hands beneath it and decided it didn't like gravity that day. I came home one afternoon and the chairs hovered above the table, their backs pointing at the ceiling. I stood in the doorway and felt a cold squeeze in my chest. What I believed and what I had to accept were at war. Maggie started waking with her hair in her hands. One morning there was a perfect circle, bare and pale, on the back of her head. My parents took her to doctors who couldn't explain it, tests and charts and that clinical, apologetic look people get when they have no answers, and the report came back the way a verdict is read aloud. The hair had been yanked out. There was no rash, no disease, no comb, only the holes where hair used to be, like a hand had reached through her scalp and pulled her apart. We heard whispers in the walls at night and the sound of children playing down the block when there was no one there, and once a wind rose inside the apartment that flattened the curtains though the windows were closed tight. My dad, exhausted and proud in that old man way, changed the locks. We tried reasons, keys, pranks, neighbors, but the house kept insisting it had its own will. When I lay down on my bed one afternoon because school had turned me brittle, something struck my side like ice, and the spindle at the end of the bed spun and lunged down as if a fist had reached up from under the mattress. My dad found deep red claw marks on his shoulder one morning, 4 long gouges like someone had dragged something angry and enormous across skin. Fear in our house stopped being a rumor and became a schedule. We called Father Donovan because Eleanor Hale, the woman who investigated things like this on late-night shows, said to call a priest if anything got worse. There's something here. I remember the way Eleanor walked into our living room and announced simply, "There's something here." She asked us to sit around the table and hold hands, like a family portrait that needed collective courage. Maggie lay in bed, and then she spoke, and it was not Maggie's voice. The words were old, filthy things that crawled across the linoleum and lodged in your throat. "Get out of here. Get out of here." We heard her say, "Get out of here," over and over, like a chorus of someone else's sermons. When the priest started, the apartment made a sound we'd heard months before on that empty street, low, like a throat clearing from the wrong side of the end of the world. The crucifix above the mantel turned upside down on its own. The curtain rods rattled. The rocking chair grinded as if something invisible had a heel and a temper. Eleanor threw holy water that crackled like a live wire where it soaked the hem of Maggie's dress. The growl got closer then, right at the door, and for a second I saw, in the way people always see a flash of film when their life redraws itself, that Miriam had been there for every moment. When you're 6, you understand betrayal in blunt terms, a friend who takes your lunch, a sister who hides your favorite crayon. But when you see the thing you thought was a toy lean toward your sister like a conspirator, and you realize it has always been the common denominator, you learn that the world can be quiet and very cruel all at once. I knew then that Miriam had nothing of human hands about her, that her painted smile was the kind that covers teeth meant for other meals. They told us to get out of the apartment while the exorcism finished. The priest stayed. We sat on the stairs and chanted prayers we had memorized awkwardly, the words tasting terrible and sweet. The noises stopped and the apartment exhaled. The priest's face told us it had worked. We got into our dad's car and drove. The city lights smeared like tears. I thought of Miriam as dead that week, of cold metal and sewers and the private indifference of trash men. I watched through the kitchen window as the garbage truck swallowed the dumpster where I'd pitched her, as if a small piece of rot had been clipped from the house. I told myself, aloud and often, that Miriam was gone. That's how you survive, with the certainty of a lie. You can't throw away what isn't wholly physical. Months passed. I tried to forget the way Maggie's eyes went flat when she stared at the static. I kept my fingers from counting the knotholes in the stair railing. I stopped collecting dolls in my house forever. I married when I was older. I moved away from that apartment, from Mom and Dad, from the house where laughter had become a layered, suspicious thing. The memory of Miriam folded itself small and secret, like a photograph shoved in a box. Years later, my daughter, my small, bright, curious girl, was 5. She had my hair, the same stubborn cowlick over her left eyebrow. One afternoon she came running into the kitchen carrying a box wrapped in the same kind of newspaper and twine that always seemed to follow my family. Her eyes were wide with the pleasure of surprise. "Mommy! Mommy! Look what I found!" I saw the doll before she set her down, and the world became a cold, hollow thing in my chest. Miriam was smaller now, the paint faded. Those same brown pigtails drooped. She sat on my counter, smiling at me as if nothing had occurred at all. The radio played something light and harmless in the background. The sun made trustable patterns across the floor. I remember kneeling down because my daughter expected me to kneel. She wanted me to be part of the wonder. Her hands were smooth against the doll's dress. The voice in my head, the old war of hope and terror, screamed with the neatness of a bell. Where did you find her? And my voice was the thing my daughter had heard before, all gentleness and concern. She shrugged like it was just another thing in the world. By the trash on Maple. She was in a box, like a present. The room tilted but didn't fall. My daughter set Miriam on the table and brushed dust off her knee as if she were a rag doll. You're gonna be my new best friend. There was a moment, the thin sliver between a heartbeat and the next, where I could have grabbed the doll and burnt it, or smashed it with the hammer in the garage, or flung it down an elevator shaft and never looked back. I could have made a ring of fire with promises and iron. I could have done 1,000 things. Instead, we both smiled, because that's what you do when you want to be a good mother and not look at the last of your family history and ask the real question: why does its shadow keep catching up with my family? My daughter hugged Miriam to her and ran off to the bedroom, the hem of her dress a comet tail. The radio clattered through a song I'd loved when I was young. The kitchen clock kept a steady, accusing tick. I stood there with my hand on the counter and the taste of metal in my mouth. Somewhere beyond the window, a truck pressed on, and the city continued to be a place built of ordinary, exchangeable things. But in my hallway, the wooden floorboards creaked in a way I did not recognize. The static in the old television in the corner flickered, just a twitch, and the hair at the back of my neck lifted the way it had when I was a child. Bad things are gonna happen in this house. A voice echoed in the hollow left by the music. It sounded like a child, but it wasn't my daughter. It was older and amused, with a patience like a thing that has waited a long time for new hands to hold it. My daughter laughed from the bedroom, and the sound made my ears ache. I told myself I would take Miriam and throw her in the dumpster. I told myself I would cast her out for both our sakes. But when I crossed the kitchen and slid the cupboard open, the hammer was gone. The window was shut. Miriam sat in the middle of the counter, her smile neat and implacable, and for a breathless, endless second, the world pulled so tight I thought it would split. "Mommy," my daughter called for me, her voice small and patient, and the kind of voice that knows nothing of covenants. I picked Miriam up because I could not do anything else. Her painted eyes were cool under my thumb. Out on Maple, the city kept turning. Inside, the doll's dress made a sound like a whisper. Somewhere in the apartment, on a street 1,000 miles and a lifetime away, a shadow unclenched and smiled, waiting for the next birthday. The story ends here, but the terror does not. Join me again, like, comment, and subscribe if you dare.